The U.S. Department of Energy's National Renewable Energy Laboratory recently released its Storage Futures Study about the role of batteries in the rapidly evolving power grid, including their role in integrating more renewable electricity generation. So I'm going to be speaking to Nate Blair, who is one of the authors of the report, and welcome to the interview, Nate.
Great, happy to be here.
Look, why don't we start with a brief overview of the study, please?
Sure. So the combination of rapidly dropping prices in renewable energy and recent price drops in energy storage have led a lot of people to wonder what the future of the market for grid storage, behind the meter storage, how that relates to electrification and actually even in the inclusion of the transportation market with electric vehicles. Our overall study, the Storage Future Study, is looking at that through the lens of some advanced modeling that we have at NREL. Looking at what the grid could look like out to 2050, how storage may or may not play a role in that, how it looks, what the future of sort of the distributed storage market might look like, and trying to weave some of these scenarios and possibilities together for decision makers everywhere that are trying to figure out where all of this is going.
Before we get into a discussion of the four phases, Nate, is it fair to say that the last couple of years have seen a tremendous advance in the battery technology, an increase in energy density, and a maybe faster than expected drop in prices?
That's correct. We're not alone. Bloomberg and a number of other entities that are looking at this have also concluded that not only has the recent cost drop come down, but we anticipate significant cost drops in batteries going forward. We're about to release the second report from our study called the Modeling Inputs Report, but that sort of tries to summarize some of that cost data. Not just for batteries, we also look at pumped hydro, which has historically been the hugest market, as well as trying to provide the reader with some idea of kind of the overall storage technology market. There's a number of non-battery technologies that are growing in at least in investment and R&D.
So let's talk about phase one, short duration storage to provide operating reserves.
Great. So prior to now, we've had the vast bulk of electricity storage on the grid has been provided by pumped hydro with 23 gigawatts, which is pretty significant. We're now up to, I think, a couple gigawatts last time I looked of battery storage, but that is being, many more projects of that nature are coming online. I think operating reserves, the easiest way to think about that is helping the grid operate smoothly. There's a variety of fluctuations in the grid. The grid's the largest machine where you have to make things and use them all at the same time. And in that process, there's a number of things, regulation reserve, frequency reserve, et cetera, that need to be provided. And historically, some of that's been done by large fossil plants, and now it's being found that some of that can be done as cheaply with battery systems.
And I would imagine that the battery storage becomes increasingly important as the percentage of wind and solar increases in the generation capacity.
That's correct. We have these variable supplies of wind and solar on the grid, and as they continue to ramp up, obviously the sun goes down every night. So how do you provide power at those other times? And right now that's done primarily with fossil and with gas. And as people are looking at scenarios where there's less and less coal and gas on the grid, how do you meet some of those needs? And I think what we see is that these cheaper batteries work together with cheaper PV and combine to provide an option for the grid that's cost effective, at least in our modeling.
So let's talk about phase number 2, the rise of battery peaking power plants.
Yeah, and I think it's important to say that that there's a couple of effects that come together quickly. One is, as you put more and more PV on the grid, that evening peak gets squeezed. So instead of being a little longer and less pronounced, the PV comes and squeezes that peak together. So it's actually narrower, and that allows a shorter duration battery to fill that peak period. And that provides, at its full capacity value, we call it. And so that narrow peak makes batteries more cost effective for those peaks, actually. And then if the price drops enough, and we're seeing this in some locations, that the price drops enough that it's actually cheaper to do this with a battery than with a gas peaking plant. So there's a little bit of a renewables effect. If you have a lot of solar, it makes the peaks narrower. So it can be a 2-4 hour sort of peak. That's what we're estimating will be kind of the first pieces of that. And then as you shave off that top narrow peak, you get to a larger peak. And so then the question is, how will batteries be cost effective for those wider peaks and ever wider peaks as you go further down into the peak periods?
Right. So in phase 2, we're talking about 2 to 4 hour duration batteries. And when you say that we're already seeing this in some jurisdictions, I would assume that California would probably be the best example in the US of that.
Yep, that's correct. I think there's a number of factors that are affecting the deployment of batteries in addition to cost. Right now, if you pair a battery with a solar plant, for example, you leverage the investment tax credit from the solar plant for the battery also. So in the near term, we're seeing some of these effects, and then obviously certain states have energy storage goals, et cetera. So some of that's playing into some of the specific projects, but the trends as we go forward will we think will show that the batteries become very competitive with gas peaking in the future.
And in terms of time frame, if we're already seeing this in some jurisdictions like California, how quickly will phase 2 be spreading out to utilities in other regions of North America, Europe, and so on?
Well, I think, first of all, you have to realize that the price of natural gas isn't the same all over the country. And so in the Pacific Northeast, for example, the price is higher, and it's obviously higher in the winter. And there is a lot of gas capacity on the grid already. So a lot of places don't need extra capacity. So it's a combination of how those plants are retiring, how these battery prices are going, et cetera. And so that's one of the things we're going to look at in a future report, which is looking at kind of that build out over time of storage at different durations.
Let's talk about phase 3, the age of low cost diurnal storage.
Right. So the idea here with phase 3, and as we go through these phases, we get to larger and larger markets. And phase 3, it overlaps some with phase 2, but the idea here is that it becomes cost effective. Basically, you've got all of this solar power in the middle of the day, and some of that gets eaten up by air conditioning loads, some of that gets eaten up by just normal demand on the grid, but there's quite a bit perhaps that's left over. And so it becomes cost effective to put that into a battery and then push it back onto the grid either later in the day. So diurnal from the day to the night. And we see, again, that combination really building out in terms of a combination of cheap photovoltaics along with cheaper batteries.
And maybe I should ask you at this point, Nate, we're not necessarily talking about lithium ion batteries all the time, are we? I mean, there's flow batteries and that are made of all sorts of different chemistries and perhaps other types of batteries.
Yeah, that's a good point. There's a number of batteries, and in our model inputs report, we touch on a number of them. There's also a variety of technologies that are kind of pegged for really long duration or almost seasonal storage, but they could be used as pumped hydro is today to meet some of these 3 and 4 hour duration events as well. So what we've tried to do in our work is say, hey, we expect batteries to be here. There's several good projections of battery costs. And what we try to say throughout is, hey, any one of these other technologies could potentially have a breakthrough and a cost reduction that exceeds that of lithium-ion batteries. And the trick with lithium-ion, also though, is we have both the grid market, the transportation market, and the consumer electronics market, which is where it's got its start, all pushing together to really kind of grow that technology, provide that market for investment and additional R&D. So, so whereas some of these other technologies are only appropriate for grid storage, obviously a flow battery is a very large piece of equipment and you can't put it on a vehicle.
So let's talk about phase 4, the end game, a multi-day to seasonal storage.
Yeah, so I think the key thing to say about phase 4 is that it's the most uncertain of the phases. I think with the other phases, we have done a lot of research and we've looked at a lot of the drivers of those phases. And I think what we're looking at with phase 4 is a lot of questions, so we have perhaps a need for seasonal power. In the spring and the fall, you have a lot of excess solar generation in a high renewable energy scenario. And you kind of would like to save that electricity and use it in the summer to meet the peaks. Or you have really significant, many of us are sitting in a polar vortex right now, so you can have significant weather events that are a number of days long. And if you're at 90+%, we're not quite sure what the number is in terms of variable renewable energy, you have less gas and other things on the grid at that point. So the flip side is that you might have any one of these long duration storage technologies might become cost effective. At that point, the other thing, if there's a large hydrogen economy, for example, it might make sense to use what we would anticipate as cheap hydrogen in that case to provide storage for many days or weeks at a time. And so there's a number of possibilities at that front that are all sustainable. But again, phase 4 really comes sort of at very high levels of renewable energy penetration. And the other piece at that point is you have to think about what does demand response do? How does the load adjust? Plus we have potentially a lot of electric vehicles on the grid, charging, discharging, and how can we get consumers to be part of the solution for those really high penetration, kind of few hours of the year type events.
Let me give you what I think, from what I've heard, the timelines would be for the various phases, and you can tell me if I'm accurate or not. So it sounds like phase 1 is mostly here or soon will be. Phase 2 is just beginning in jurisdictions like California and will spread over the next number of years. It sounds like phase 3 is kind of a, late 2020s and into the 2030s. And then phase 4 is sometime after that, but uncertain at this point because it's based on technologies or things like hydrogen that aren't here yet. Is that a fair summation of the timing of these phases?
I think that reflects some of the conventional wisdom. I think that first of all, the phases overlap a little bit. So you could have a phase 3 energy time shifting technology, but I'm also selling a little bit of what's left of the operating reserve market. And so that's so there's a little bit of overlap and a little bit of what we've called value stacking in some of these scenarios. I think the other thing is that our study looks out to 2050 and varies a number of costs and other parameters, but it doesn't have a policy implication in the scenarios that we've run to date. And so if you start to look at policies that could dramatically accelerate all of that deployment, I think you could see that timeline shifting to more near term.
Nate, thank you very much for this. Really appreciate it.
Great, thank you.